Hello, Journey Groups. So good to be with you through video today. Thank you so much for taking the time to look at this video in the Dig Deeper section. We're going to spend a few minutes exploring a couple of ideas related to Sunday's sermon and to the Journey Group lesson, and then I'm going to turn it back over to your guides, and we're going to walk through a few questions in response to this brief video message that we're going to look at together today. So good to be with you. Thank you so much for doing this. We're going to be taking a look today at a specific section of the passage that I preached from on Sunday morning, Ephesians chapter 2. And we're going to be looking specifically at the idea of identity and resurrection and why those things matter for the Christian life. And so the passage we're looking at is Ephesians 2, starting at verse 6. And this is the passage. "And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace, expressed in the kindness to us in Christ Jesus. For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." What is the connection here between resurrection and identity? This whole series we're looking at the question of identity. What does it mean to be Christian people and to have our identity be remade by Christ? In Ephesians 2, Paul tells us that we are raised with Christ and that we are seated in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus. That is a huge concept, and so we have to ask ourselves the question, what does that mean for us? How does that begin to reshape our identity? I want to begin by just offering a brief narration of what modern civilization tells us about our identity, about what modern philosophy tells us about the way that our identities are constructed. About 120 years ago or so, a philosopher in Germany began writing by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche. Many of you have gone out and seen the movie. It's pretty popular right now, God's Not Dead. In many ways, that movie is a response to Nietzsche's philosophy. But I also think it's a little bit of a misunderstanding of Nietzsche's philosophy because Nietzsche was the one who actually coined the phrase, God is dead. And so there's this kind of backlash against that from Christianity, which is totally expected. However, Nietzsche wasn't necessarily celebrating that fact. More, he was looking around at modern civilization and he was saying the way that we construct our identities, the way that we consider ourselves to be human, is a way that seems to dismiss God. In other words, we have believed that we are self-made creatures, that we can construct ourselves, that we can build our own identities. And what Nietzsche basically saw was just an observation of what was already taking place in Western civilization. And so the full phrase that he actually uses is, God is dead and we have killed him. And the reason why he says that is because he's looking around at people who really believe that they can construct their own identities. But he also sees this incredible hopelessness in that. He basically says that there's no goodness out there to be found. If we are truly people who can construct our own identities, if we are truly people who believe that we can build ourselves, then there really is no objective goodness beyond ourselves. And so, of course, we begin to see how despairing that is, how hopeless that kind of a philosophy is. The good news for us is that the gospel that we find in Ephesians chapter 1 and Ephesians chapter 2 begins to dismantle that kind of a hopelessness and instead begins to overcome it with the hope of Christ's resurrection. Now, Paul tells us that we are resurrected with Christ. We are raised with Christ and seated with Christ in the heavenly realms in him. How in the world is that possible? Here's another idea that I want to suggest to you. There's a theologian who has been doing some work over the last 20 years by the name of Oliver O'Donovan. O'Donovan suggests that the way that you and I as Christians are related to one another, the way that we consider our life together, the things that we do, the way that we conceive of politics, the way that we conceive of loving one another, has everything to do with Christ's resurrection. And O'Donovan bases a lot of his work out of Ephesians chapter 1 and Ephesians chapter 2, and I think there's strong warrant for that here. The reason is that he suggests that All things have been placed under authority in Christ's resurrection and exaltation. When Christ was resurrected, he wasn't just resurrected and then remain kind of here on the earth with us. Instead, Christ was exalted, and that makes a difference because Christ was given authority over all things. And so now what you have is this resurrected power Christ who is raised up over all things, so that resurrection begins to have authority over all things. And what that means for us is that for the first time in created history, the undoing of death takes authority over all of the creation. See, up until the resurrection, the historical notion was that creation was, after the fall, headed toward death, headed toward destruction, headed toward chaos. And now God has done something decisive about that. God will not allow creation to just disintegrate into despair, won't allow creation to disintegrate into chaos. Instead, the resurrection power, the power that overcomes disintegration, the power that overcomes destruction, the power that overcomes death and chaos, is exalted over and above all of creation. And that creates for us, in a sense, this real world of Christ's resurrection, a world of reality that we can step into by faith in Jesus Christ. But many of us also are very tempted to live in this fake world that tells us that we really don't need that resurrection power, this fake world that would suggest to us that we can be the constructors of our own identity, that we can do it on our own. And so the challenge that comes to us here is a challenge to leave the fake world and step into the real world of Christ's exaltation, of Christ's resurrection and exaltation. And the challenge that comes to us as we talk about our identities is to find our identities not as people who construct our own identities, but as people who have given our identities under the power of the resurrected and exalted Christ. And that really doesn't sit well with modern people. Why? Because we still continue to believe that we construct our own identities, that we can do it on our own, that there's got to be something unique and special about us that doesn't come from outside of us, but comes from deep within us. The problem is, there's a certain hopelessness about that because I don't want to be just the person that I can make myself, because that can only take me so far. The hope of the gospel is that we can be remade as we place ourselves under the authority of the resurrected and exalted Christ. So that doesn't sit well with us many times. We don't like to be placed under authority of anything. But the challenge that's offered to us and the goodness that's offered to us in this reality is that we are leaving a fake world and stepping into a very real world when we place ourselves under Christ's authority. We're going to turn it back over to the Journey Group guides at this point. There are a few follow-up questions to this video that I'd like us to discuss as Journey Groups and really wrestle with this idea of identity construction and focus on the idea and the question of how you have been constructing your own identity. Where does your identity come from? And is there goodness to be found as you place your identity under the authority of Jesus Christ to be remade as Christ has taken authority over all things? Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I love all of you Journey Groups, and I look forward to seeing you back at church on Sunday.